Still today, I definitely have a soft spot for the fashion industry.
Yeah.
But I think like working for as in a mostly in a buying position, the the metrics that you're measured upon are basically selling more.
Yeah.
And I felt that there weren't a lot of people, at least in my network, that were talking about sustainability at the time. And I mean, even now, the fashion industry still gets criticized for their sort of greenwashing. I mean, it's in every industry. It's not just in fashion, but there's a lot of problems, a lot of social problems, a lot of problems in supply chain, a lot of problems with toxic materials and chemicals and
Yeah.
pollution and yeah, and it definitely takes a toll on
Hmm.
human sustainability and human health.
Dishonesty, disrespectful, discrimination, detached, dismissive. That's it. I'm done. Relationships can be messy. Are you having trouble with your personal or professional relationship? Not to worry. As a relationship therapist and coach for over 25 years, I have a lot to share, and so will my guest experts. Let's get smarter in our business and personal lives so we can be our best selves. Now, let's get on with the show. So today's interview is yet another great example how we can't dissociate business and relationships, or what I say, business and pleasure, because we get most of our pleasure from our relationships. And the more I interview executives and business leaders, business people, business owners, I realize this more and more that I mean, I'm not going to paint a huge brush across the whole executive landscape and say something like, "Oh, if you're great at business, you're going to be a great partner, or you're going to have great family relationships, great peer relationships." No, of course not. But when you run a business, or you own a business, or you work, as a team leader, you do gain incredible skills in dealing with people, working with people, managing people, etc. And this is just another example. And so it's quite interesting conversation, because in the beginning you're going to hear us talk about fashion and sustainability in fashion, climate control, career evolvement, and then we completely flip it to what one does when they're told that their family member has cancer, and how to manage all your emotions, and dealing with something like this, something so heavy. Yeah, hitting a lot of interesting topics, because I think there's a time to put your head down and put the blinders on and go hard in your career. And then there's another time in your life where you don't look down, you lean back, and you feed the cup that with all the love and attention that you need to give yourself. So you need to do both. And going through what Madeline had to go through in her personal life, um, while sort of climbing in her career, it just shows, how this builds resiliency. And I don't care where you are right now in your business or your life, you're going to suffer. None of us escape suffering in life. And I think it's important to note that, and to know, and prepare yourself that when it does happen, you're gonna gain great skills from that. If that gives you any sort of um, soulless, like in thinking that, my gosh, like, what do you mean I have to suffer? Well, you will, and you probably have lots already in your life. And this is just another testimonial to say that you do make it on the other side, and your whole perspective changes, and the amount of emotional growth that comes with that is something to be very thankful for, if you can even say that. So I hope you enjoy the show. And yeah, let me know by giving me a review if you can. Thanks. Welcome back to episode 12 of Mixing Business with Pleasure. And I have the pleasure to introducing you to Madeline Armitage. And I came across Madeline's profile, I guess you could say, on LinkedIn. I had to be reminded by Madeline how I actually found her. But I mean, when I don't know, I think I have an eye for, or maybe I just have a radar out for, women that are doing some pretty cool things. And as a psychotherapist, I know what it takes, like in terms of, your yeah, like just like mental energy sometimes as a business owner myself, and to do all the things and to have all the feelings and emotions that women have. That yeah, I just reach out to people, and Madeline was one of them, which I was really interested to know more about. So welcome, Madeline.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Okay, well, as always, I want my guests to introduce themselves so that we get a little bit of a background story about what you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so my name is Madeline Armitage, and I now am working in the climate and sustainability space, also a little bit in the social impact space as well, because those two often overlap. And I'm helping founders in the early stages, usually around seed to Series A, with fundraising. So they're in the point in their business where they've sort of bootstrapped, or maybe they've raised a pre-seed or friends and family round, and they have a little bit of revenue, a little bit of traction, but they haven't really gone into raising either like a full larger round, 1 million to 5 million, and maybe they haven't taken institutional capital yet, and what that looks like, and supporting those founders in navigating that, both like from a strategic standpoint and operationally, and a lot of education as well, and then network and sort of making connections if they're appropriate at that time. So that is where I find myself today, but it was a very windy road to get here. Sometimes I say I don't really know how I ended up here, but yeah, because it wasn't straight and narrow in any way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
before you continue, like just in case people aren't really that familiar with these investing terms like seed
yeah.
stage, Series A, etc., and um, maybe also mention like where you live, and
Mhm.
yeah, and how you sort of even got into the work that you do.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I mentioned, definitely was not a straight and narrow path. I actually started my career on the East Coast. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Virginia, and I was really wanted to work in the fashion industry as a young girl. I loved fashion. I loved looking at fashion magazines. Vogue was like my Bible. And when I visited New York City and I had internship in New York working in the fashion industry, I really was like, oh my gosh, yes, this I want to move to this city. I want to work here because it's really the epicenter of fashion, of course. So I did that for almost 7 to 8 years.
Mm,
And for the majority of that time, I was working for a startup company that was sort of entering growth stage. We had already been acquired by Nordstrom's, which was a very obviously large corporate entity, and we were like a very small, scrappy one. And so I was with them for 6.5 years in a merchandising role.
But
Yeah.
may I ask you, like, what was your education though? I mean, like, did you study
Yeah.
fashion or?
Yeah, I
Oh, you
did. So I
did.
went, yeah, I went to Virginia Tech and they actually have a pretty good textile program.
Mm,
So I double majored in business marketing
mm.
and my other degree in fashion was fashion merchandise and design. So you would do product development and you study textiles as well. So
Okay,
that was, yeah.
and did you entertain the thought at all about staying in Virginia, or like your heart was set on let's go to like a fashion mecca like New York and just
Oh
go?
yeah, I was definitely like so I did my internship my junior year between my junior and senior year of college and I was introduced to um my I guess the associate that I worked for through my program. So we go to New York for a week with the fashion merchandising program, and we go around to like all the different sort of alumni that work in fashion in New York City. So we went to like WWD, we went to like a Broadway production to see like costume design and theater. And I would also host what you know once I landed my job in New York, I would host that same class, that alumni class, to come visit our office in New York, which was Nordstrom, nordstromrack.com. So it's just like a way to support the ecosystem of students at Virginia Tech because it's in Blacksburg, Virginia. It's like in a pretty rural
Mm-hmm.
part. It's not even really that close to Washington D.C., or like a
Yeah.
huge metropolitan area. I mean, one of the closest cities is Richmond, which is about like 2.5, 3 hours away.
Yeah. And so
Yeah, there's
in your age, like what's your age about around this time then? Like you're like 22,
yeah,
24?
yeah. Like I'd say I was like 21, 22 when I moved
Were
to
you
New
scared?
York.
Were you scared?
I wasn't really scared. I was pretty fearless, and I think that like a lot of people, when you're young, you're pretty naive and you're
Yeah.
pretty fearless.
Yeah.
And like I moved into an apartment. I had two roommates. We would split the rent, and
Didn't
yeah,
know them from a hole in the ground.
yeah, like
Yeah,
they.
yeah.
I mean, just like a friend of a friend sort of
Okay.
connection, and yeah. So I guess I had like a little bit of a network in that way. Um, but yeah, so I did kind of describe that experience of growing that organization in Nordstrom as being like on a roller coaster rocket ship. Because so during my time there, the business HauteLook.com and NordstromRack.com grew to $1 billion business. It was the fastest growing Nordstrom company to reach $1 billion. And I obviously didn't have like I wasn't the only one to make that possible. We had a lot of different teams in Los Angeles and Seattle and New York that all had to work together to make that possible. And our fulfillment centers, which were in, different parts in the US, one in California, one in New Jersey, one in Pittsburgh. So a lot of different teams that made that possible. And obviously, like with the backing of a large corporate, you get a lot of funding that other startups might not have because we were acquired. So they were able to build us like a state-of-the-art fulfillment center and implement, different technologies and softwares that is kind of like what the roller coaster portion is, because we were always integrating new systems and trying to integrate the two entities together. So when I was exiting in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, leading up to that, a lot of my work was working with the Seattle corporate team to sort of like pinpoint what areas of the business were really critical and basically doing more with less. Like what brands did we need to really prioritize? What systems and processes did we use in our office that they needed to be aware of, because there was a huge handoff. Well, there were multiple handoffs through the acquisition because obviously, with acquisitions, a lot of times some of the senior leaderships gets let go and they integrate and they bring in people from headquarters. So that there a number of times, we went through those different structural organizational changes. But eventually in 2019, they were making the push that they wanted their buyers to be in Seattle. That is the Nordstrom strategy. They have all their buyers in Seattle. And so we were basically handing off our business to buyers that were in Seattle.
Okay,
And so,
can I ask, was that an exciting time for you or a stressful time for you? Like when the acquisition happened and exiting the company and things like that. Like,
yeah. Well, to be honest, I was very young going into that
yeah,
role. And so the acquisition actually already had taken place, but like that had already taken place
yeah.
before I arrived in 2012.
Okay.
And so, Nordstrom owned us, but even in the beginning, like we weren't getting paid through Nordstrom, we were still getting paid through like ADP system. So we had to obviously move onto their payroll and all of that. So that's what I mean when it wasn't integrated in the sense that when I arrived, it was still operating as Whole.com. And then we launched NordstromRack.com in I believe it was Cinco de Mayo of 2014.
Okay.
And that is how the business operates today. It operates as NordstromRack.com. So
Okay.
basically, it's the online e-commerce platform for Nordstrom's off-price business, which is like the Nordstrom Rack stores that everybody loves to
Right.
shop at.
Right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, the way that it felt during that, I mean, definitely, I would say being really young and experiencing, some of senior leadership, leaving, or, kind of like being giving being like, okay, your time is up here. That was really sad because you had worked with those people for a really long time, and
Okay.
you'd seen like their blood, sweat, and tears, and they were kind of some of them were just they didn't have room for them organizationally, and so yeah, that was definitely sad to see. But I think when I was leaving after 6.5 years in 2019, and it wasn't just myself, it was like a lot of the merchandising team that was based in New York. They just wanted, they wanted to do things a certain way. And so I think at that point I was sort of ready for the next thing because it had been a long time and it was long hours and
Yeah.
very scrappy work. And so I think I was ready at that point. But I think
Scrappy in the sense of like all the like there's a bunch of balls in the air and no one really knows what's going on, or there's a lot of uncertainty, or like in what way?
Well, they were trying to make the business profitable, and we were, we weren't really like doing the traditional Nordstrom way of like buyers being in Seattle, and we operated in New York like for as a strategic position because that's where inventory is, that's where brands are, that's like where the market moves very fast in off price.
Yeah.
There's more seasons, it's more cyclical than it's traditional full price where it follows more like 4 to 6 seasons and in market and stuff. And we would go to market as well, but we would also like every week my buyer would be out procuring inventory, and that was the nature of the business, and so it made sense for us to be in New York City.
Okay.
Yeah, so and honestly that whole experience now feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
I was so young, I was like right out of college when I had
Yeah.
that job.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's something very advantageous about that, right? And there's something that's, extremely naive about that, but it's you sort of have that mindset it's like, okay, sounds good. Like I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
you have no idea what's going on. But like you're willing to do whatever it takes, and that's really neat too. Like you must have kind of felt like the world is your oyster. Like, if I go to like, were you that way or were you sort of like, you know, geographically you had a certain preference and you weren't willing to, you know,
Well, I was very passionate about, and still today, I definitely have a soft spot for the fashion industry.
yeah,
But I think like working for as in a mostly in a buying position, the the metrics that you're measured upon are basically selling more.
yeah,
And I felt that there weren't a lot of people, at least in my network, that were talking about sustainability at the time. And I mean, even now, the fashion industry still gets criticized for their sort of greenwashing. I mean, it's in every industry. It's not just in fashion, but there's a lot of problems, a lot of social problems, a lot of problems in supply chain, a lot of problems with toxic materials and chemicals and
Yeah.
pollution and yeah, and it definitely takes a toll on
Hmm.
human sustainability and human health and planetary health. And obviously now I have words and vocabulary to describe that, but when I was working in it, I didn't.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like, so at the time, that was sort of when Rent the Runway was also growing and seeing a lot of success. And that
Wait,
was,
what is that? Rent the runway?
yeah, Rent the Runway is a platform that you can basically rent dresses and designer outfits
Okay.
for like either 4 days or 8 days. And then you send it back, they dry clean it, and it goes back into their system. And so it's basically a way to, if you have an event coming up or if you just want new
Yeah.
work clothes for
Yep.
your closet, but you don't want to pay designer
Yeah.
prices. And also like you don't want to be wasteful with, your
Yeah.
consumption habits. And so
And that's still going
um
on right now? It's
oh
still,
yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of them. And then also, there's the real, which is, basically using, I would say even like more, designer clothing than Rent the Runway, because Rent the Runway also offers contemporary,
Okay.
and yeah, more, like lower price points. And
Yeah.
I would say the Real, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they
No.
offer, yeah, so they do, they'll basically like say, for example, you have like a Gucci bag that you're not using anymore, but it still has value. You
Hmm.
can sell that product to the Real, they authenticate it, and then it can be repurchased. So it's basically like thrifting,
Okay.
um, but like designer goods.
Hmm.
And you're not always paying the designer price,
Yeah.
and it's something that's already been made, and is
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
circulation.
So you
So
can sell to them, but you can also buy from them.
yeah,
Okay.
yes, exactly. It's a
Okay.
marketplace. And yeah, so those were sort of the two that were on my radar at the
Hmm.
time. But I mean, now I look at the landscape and there's so much more opportunity within fashion sustainability. But I still think the industry faces the challenges that it did,
Hmm.
5 years ago.
So what made you sort of like focus in on environmental, like sustainability?
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't really know it at the time. It did bother me when I was working in it, basically that the only way be to show success and to perform was basically just selling more inventory and growing your department. And we had this really smart, very funny financial planner who basically, there was this one boot style, and he said that if you had stacked all the boots up that we had sold that year of this one style, they would reach the top of Mount Everest. And I was like, whoa, that
Yeah.
is a lot, right? And then I was thinking about myself within the organization, like we're just this one quadrant of a much larger corporation. They basically split their business into four quadrants, and we were the smallest one. And then even within that, I was managing, when I left, I was managing about $46 million of inventory. And that was one of like the smallest portions within that department. Because remember, we also have buyers in Seattle, which they manage a ton more inventory
Mm.
than what we were doing online off price.
Mm.
So, I was thinking to myself as this very small portion of this, and it's just one business too. There's
Yeah.
obviously Nordstrom, but then there's Saks, there's Neiman's,
Yeah.
um, there was Barney's, all of
Yeah.
that. So I was like, wow, that's a lot, and I just think that, the capitalistic model is basically that you need to sell more in
Yeah.
order to, report to your shareholders' earnings if you're a public company, or even, if you're a private company, and report to your investors or stakeholders that this business is thriving and we're growing. And I'm not, I do think that capitalism is like a great way to propel like the best innovations to market.
Mm.
And it's not, I'm not against like capitalist model at
No.
all. I think that you need that in order to sort of get like the best business products and services. But yeah, it just bothered me a little bit, all of the waste and all the problems. Like if you watch any of the documentaries on the fashion industry, yeah, so it was weird because my pendulum basically swang like very far away from that. I was like, I don't want to do this. And I mean, not to mention like the pay in the fashion industry is like really bad. Like I think the most money that I ever made um was like 85,000 plus a
Yeah.
bonus. And that was after being at that company for, you know, that amount of time. And that was actually a lot of money for
Yeah.
an assistant buyer role. And that was because we were at a really good company like Nordstrom, who does treat their employees well.
Hmm.
But I found that when I left, that was a really high salary. And that,
Hmm.
you know, most people were offering 70, and you're living in New York City where the rent is two, $3,000, $4,000. So it just doesn't go very far.
No.
And so I was like, I'm working so hard, and you're
Mm.
not getting paid a lot. And the typical relationship structure with women in fashion, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, is the man works in finance.
Yeah.
And so it works because, you know, the woman can follow her passion of working in fashion.
Right.
And you don't really need to worry about rent, because if you have a partner that's willing to support you and they're working in finance, they're getting paid like at least twice or three times what you're making. So yeah, or maybe you just come from money or something.
Yeah, but that
But
sounds depressing. Like,
mhm.
you're relying on someone else to survive. Do you
Yeah, yeah.
disagree?
I mean, I think it depends on the nature of your relationship. And, you know, so it works for a lot of couples. And even if you're not living in New York City or San Francisco or Chicago and these major cities that are very expensive and the rent is really high, like even if you're just living in a more rural or not as
Hmm.
expensive city, I think sometimes it can still work. It just depending on like the nature of the relationship, and like what your goals are as an individual. Like some people in the fashion industry, like they never want to leave because they're so, you know, they love it. They love what they do. It's creative, it's fun,
Yeah.
it's a form of like human expression.
Yeah.
But for me, I just didn't, you know, I didn't like this feeling of working really hard, really long hours, and not getting compensated for that, like in the way that I wanted to. And then when I left, I
Who
just,
would? Who would? Like, I mean,
yeah. And I mean, honestly, like even like 85,000, like I think to a lot of people, that's a really good salary.
hmm.
And I'm not complaining by that by any means, because I was actually very happy when I got that raise, because I think I was like doing like 60,000 a year for a
Yeah.
lot of years, you know, or something
Yeah.
around that. Um, but I mean, I think more so I just wanted to expand my knowledge within business. And it was always encouraged by my family to do that, to go back to school and to get my MBA. And yeah, I think in America, it's a lot of people in business have MBAs, and it's very like normalized and in America that that's the course, right, that you take if you
Yeah.
maybe you want to do like a pivot in your career, or you just want to be taken more seriously at work, or you want to, you know, expand your knowledge in business. So
But from
I,
from what I know, it's extremely expensive as well. Isn't an MBA
yeah,
extreme?
MBA is very expensive. And that's actually one of the reasons I decided to get my degree in Oregon, is because I was looking at schools in New York City, like Columbia and NYU, and they're very expensive. And I was already asking basically to be supported through that by my family. And I just think, I mean, talking about the rent again in New York, right?
Mm,
So they're paying, you know, if you're paying for rent and then you're paying for school, that's a
a
pretty penny.
lot.
Yeah, exactly. And I ended up actually getting a partial scholarship to the University of Oregon.
Good.
My parents were living in Oregon, and they still live there now. And so I was able to live in their house. I didn't have to pay rent, and I had a
Oh,
partial scholarship. So, and it's
wonderful.
just not as expensive as
Yeah.
like Columbia or NYU or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and it was really in Oregon where I was learning about like sustainability and renewable
Mm.
energy and all of that, because I mean, it's a very green state.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I guess like the surroundings is what encouraged me to pursue the MBA track in sustainability.
Hmm.
So Oregon, you can basically in your MBA, you pick a specialization, and they have a sustainable business practice
Mm.
track which you can take. So you have to take specific classes within sustainability that as it relates to business.
Hmm.
So it's cool because you get to learn about all of your, you get to do all of your regular business coursework, but then you also are learning about the different things like LCAs, life cycle assessments, looking at climate change, sustainable ways that businesses can sort of look holistically at their carbon footprint and how to approach that, and the different reporting agencies. You learn about, the UN SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. If you work in sustainability, like
Hmm.
you know what those are.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and then you could take classes outside of the business school. I took some in the geology department, which is basically looking about at like how the global north and the global south think about climate change, and
Okay.
why sometimes we go to these um, like international forums on climate change at COP, and we are at a standstill with, because everybody has their perspective on how we got here
Right.
and how we should move forward and who should pay for it and all of that. So you got to, learn about that from a professor in the geology department,
Yeah.
which is honestly, I think one of the best classes that I took
Mm.
in sustainability, because you really get like a worldview
Mm.
on the issue.
Hmm.
And then was also able to take class in the physics department, learning about renewable energy, which, I'd never taken a physics class in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes,
Wow.
but yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, when we were talking before the episode. So while all this was going on, my sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2B. And it was kind of weird how it happened because my sister and I, as I mentioned, we grew up in Virginia, and my parents then moved to Oregon when I was in New York and my sister was still in high school. And so I actually never lived in Oregon. But my family was there.
Hmm.
And my sister had moved on and gotten her degree in exercise physiology. She has a master's in that. And she was working in Austin, Texas, in exercise physiology for cardiac rehab in a
Mm.
rehab facility. But this was while COVID was going on. And so it was a very stressful environment for her. And she decided that she wanted to pursue holistic health and get a degree in that. And so she basically left her apartment and her job and moved home. And we arrived in Oregon at the same month in 2020 in September.
Wow.
And so that was weird too, because we were both adults, but living at home, back home, home with our parents at the same time. And a few months later, she was graduating from her holistic health program. And that's when we got her cancer diagnosis.
Jeez.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a very heightened time.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so I was getting my degree and, going to school in my MBA. And then when my sister was going through, the whole discovery process and of, what, and also grappling with the fact that, yeah, you really do have cancer, because she was a healthy,
Yeah.
beautiful, vibrant, and studying
Yeah.
holistic health. So like doing all the things that we're all told that we should do, and actually
Hmm.
like living that and learning about that. So we're like, yeah, very smart, very active, very healthy individual. And then she's also young. She was like, when she was 25, 26 when the diagnosis, she had just turned, I think, 26. She just had her birthday. So yeah, very young. No reason why you should be diagnosed with
No.
cancer. Um, yeah, and so was sort of like being the family manager at the time of dealing with that. So I was very close with my sister, and she and my mother were sort of always kind of like oil and water a little bit, like they kind of butt heads. My sister wanted her to implement some of these healthy lifestyle choices and yeah, just things that come up
Yeah.
between mother and daughter. And so kind of like I was always sort of being the in-between
Mhm.
person between them um and then, yeah, my father was still, working as a physician at the time. And yeah, he basically knew right away when he saw the bump on my sister's neck or collarbone that it was cancer. And we both were like, no way, he's being dramatic. There's no
Yeah.
way. Yeah, but it ended up, yeah, it was.
Gee.
Yeah. And so she was going through her first chemo track, which is typically 12 rounds of chemo when I was in my first year of my program, and we were living next door to each other. She was in one bedroom and I was next to her, and so I'd always like pop my head in and check on her in the morning to make sure like she had what she needed, or if she wanted me to like go get matcha or make her a matcha or something, or does
Mhm.
she have water? Just making sure that she has someone like checking in on her.
Yeah.
And then yeah, my mom too, like checking in on her because she was basically in about a year-long depression from the news, and she had been sort of affected by seasonal affective
Oh,
disorder
right. In
living in
Oregon.
Oregon. Yeah, it's really gray for like 9 months out of the year, and then it's really beautiful for about three.
Mm.
um, but yeah, so we were aware that this had happened before, and it usually happens like with the seasons.
Yeah.
But this was new, where it was lasting much longer than we had experienced before. And yeah, and it was really sparked by this threat of that she might lose a child. And that, yeah, so I
Yeah.
was trying to help my mother as much as I could and help the relationship between the two of them. While, my mom's feeling really sad and my sister's also feeling really like physically unwell and just like mentally and physically drained from the chemo and being sick and just the stress of it all.
So what was the prognosis at that time? Like was everybody very like was your sister very positive, or was the family positive and your mom like I mean, it sounds like it changed from seasonal depression to situational depression for your
Mhm.
mom.
Yeah.
Like and how was your dad with all of it? Like
Yeah, no, I mean, the whole experience was very burdensome and stressful upon like the whole family unit.
yeah,
I sort of went into like this manager role of like hyperactive, hyper vigilant,
yeah,
almost like martyr mentality of like,
yeah.
I'll do anything for anybody, and really just being empathetic towards everybody's particular situation. And,
Sort of like
sort
that
of.
team leader role, in the
Yeah, I
company.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I know that you talk a lot about like business and relate like personal relationships and how they're very similar. And yeah, I definitely was like that manager role. I think it flipped sort of between myself and my dad, depending on the situation, because he's a physician and so he's dealt with cancer patients in his practice and is obviously very educated. He been his physician and wanted to be a physician since he was like 3 years old. Like he
Mhm.
always knew. And so, yeah, very, very smart and talented physician, and also had like really good bedside manner and was loved by his patients and nurses and everybody in the hospital. So, um, yeah, he would do a lot for my sister. He's a very good cook.
Mm.
Like if he wasn't a doctor, he should open a restaurant or something because
Wow.
he learned from his mother how to cook really well. He's like a gourmet chef. So he would make things for my sister. She was a vegetarian at the time, and so he would make her like vegan stock and a
Yeah.
lot of soups from scratch that were just like really delicious.
Yeah.
And so I got to benefit from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, but also my sister also was she was very strong and um, sort of. outspoken advocate for herself in the whole process. And that was, I think, something that came pretty naturally to her to be an advocate. I mean, obviously, when you're in a hospital system or any type of care system, you have to be, but I don't think that most people realize that until they've had a few situations where they're like, okay, something's not right,
Right.
that they need to speak up because
Yeah.
just yeah, and it was COVID at the time too. So like, when she was going in for her chemo, we couldn't sit with her because
No.
no one was allowed in the room. So she'd have to go in by herself, which is just really sad, and
Yeah.
sit and get the chemo for hours. And it just makes you feel really icky. So we would like take turns picking her up and dropping her off, and depending like on like our schedules and everything. And I think like honestly, when I think about the like my family, obviously coming from a medical background, like with my dad being a physician, my mom was a nurse, even my sister, worked in a medical setting
Yeah.
and had education around that. And obviously even within our community, like even my dad was able to sort of get connected to the right people, when you get a diagnosis like that,
Yeah.
and very quickly get my sister into the right system in order to get a biopsy. So, and also like, if you think about the bills that come along with having cancer, that was like, it was just never a problem. It was something that my dad took care of. And
Yeah.
like, we didn't have to think about that. And that's not the case for most people that are
Oh.
diagnosed. And also just like having that wherewithal of like the medical system and how things operate.
Yeah.
It's still confusing even when you have all of that knowledge, right? Like sometimes it's still frustrating and still confusing. So
Yeah.
I felt like that in that regard, we had some things working in our favor. And I think like as far as her attitude and the attitude, I don't ever think that, aside from like my mom feeling the way that she did, I just don't think that it crossed our minds that she wasn't going to beat this. And
Right.
she did beat it. She's over a year cancer free now.
Oh, wow.
And she bought a house. She's getting married in September.
Mm.
But it was almost 3 years of um, getting her going in and out of chemo, her getting scans, because you can only get scanned every 3 months to see if the cancer was still there.
Yeah.
But so for the first round of chemo, that chemo track and the stage that she was at and the type of cancer that she had, it's basically 95% curable with
Okay.
that chemo track. So it
Yeah.
is a curable cancer. But the thing is that it didn't work. And so that's why the time period was extended. So that was essentially like the first 6 to 9 months was that. And then, another 3 months to get the scan where it said, okay, yes, you still have cancer cells in your body. And then she basically, because she was a holistic health coach, she wanted to basically give her body a rest,
Yeah.
try and use some holistic remedies.
Mm.
So she took some time off. And, while she was taking the time off, you have to wait another 3 months to get a scan to see, is it working? And the
Mm-hmm.
thing about Hodgkin lymphoma is it's very slow growing cancer. So it's a little bit hard to see on the scans
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't growing like enough to be like, yes, the cancer
Right.
is growing and you need to do something immediately. Right.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody had their opinion, the physicians, my sister, my dad, everybody
Yeah.
has their opinion about what you should do. But at the end of the day, like I said, my sister was like a very strong advocate and educated herself a lot about different holistic practices that you can do to help your body heal. And also, educating herself about the different sort of medical treatments that she was going to have to endure.
Mm-hmm.
So there was about a year time period where she wasn't in any type of care, like,
Yeah.
medical care. So that obviously elongated the process, but
Yeah.
eventually, yeah, she did go back and get more outpatient chemo and then inpatient stem cell transplant.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so
So how did, yeah, like what is, like, so you're a student throughout this whole process then? Like,
well,
of her illness?
I was a student for 2 years, and then I graduated in June of 2022. And basically, so I graduated on like a Friday or Saturday, and on Wednesday, she went in to get the results from one of her scans, which showed that she still had cancer.
Oh,
And basically, that just sent my sister into like overdrive because she had to to receive the stem cell transplant. She had to move to Seattle to get into that hospital system because the hospital system we were in Eugene just didn't have the
yeah,
so that that team of doctors to
yeah.
support the stem cell transplant. So yeah, it was like my graduation weekend when she was basically telling the family, okay, I'm going to move to Seattle and you know do this. So I basically graduated, and I knew leading up to my graduation that I didn't want to take a full-time job because I didn't know what the diagnosis
Yeah.
was going to be. And I had supported her through the first round of chemo. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll just do it again, right? I mean, supported her along with my family, of
Yeah.
course, but we sort of were thinking, okay, like I'll move to Seattle with you
Hmm.
and I'll just take a part-time job or whatever, and then I can help you. But she ended up falling in love with somebody in my program.
Oh,
So they actually ended up moving to Seattle together and living
oh,
together. And he stepped in for that role. And but still, I didn't want to leave the Pacific Northwest because I actually had a partner who
mm,
for a year was in New York where we met, and
mm.
then moved to California to Los Angeles. So was also dealing with a long distance relationship while this was going on. Not recommended.
No.
Um, yeah, so, but I didn't want to leave the Pacific Northwest, like Oregon or Seattle, area because just in case. And I wanted to support my family, my mom and dad as well, because, they also needed support going through all of this because they basically rented a home in Seattle so that they could drive up every time that she had chemo, so that
Hmm.
like if they needed support, that they basically, my dad would again cook her homemade food from scratch,
Yeah.
the way that she wanted it, like all vegetarian, and basically like bring it over to her. And then when she went into the hospital for the stem cell transplant, they, would go and they were living up there for
Yeah.
that whole time period, and they would go see her every day and pick up her laundry, do her laundry. Yeah,
Yeah.
which my mom actually had to do with gloves on because
Oh my gosh.
the
Yeah.
medicine that she was receiving was like toxic. So yeah, so they would basically support her. So she had a really good team of doctors, a really good team of nurses, and also she had the like family support too. And I think it's so common. It's
Yeah.
the
Well, no, I don't know how. Okay, what you went through and what your family went through. I mean, I don't. Yeah, to say like maybe that's not what you're saying is common, but like, uh,
I just mean that cancer is so
oh
common. And yeah, I don't think you realize it until it happens to you or your family or somebody
yeah,
that's really close to you. It's just, I mean, disease,
yeah,
and it is very
yeah,
common, especially
and
in America. And yeah, cancer is too.
well, and also the balance between treating something like this holistically and conventionally as well. Like, I mean, it's every case is different, right? Every individual needs are different. And but like how about yourself? I mean, looking back now, so I guess you didn't have to put your career on hold. Um,
I think,
but what was supposed to be a very exciting time in your life, what like was like
yeah.
clouded?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I still performed well in school. I still got good grades, and still graduated and all of that. Um, but it was just a very heightened time. And yeah, I just remember like being crying a lot
You,
and just like everything just feeling very raw,
were you
like,
were you crying? I'm interested. Were you crying alone in isolation, or only with certain people? Like, were you hiding the immense like stress? Like, tell me
Yeah, I
about that.
mean,
Therapy? Were
I
you?
think yeah, so I was in therapy. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean it would happen, of course, like in my therapy sessions,
Mm-hmm.
people that I could confide in,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes with of course with my partner,
Mm-hmm.
and even with my family, and obviously sometimes alone too. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you need that, like you like humans, I think sometimes just need to be alone and cry.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because like it's a release and yeah, it's like weird. It's like kind of comforting in a way
Yeah.
because it is this release.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I did. I was seeing a mental health therapist, and that was very helpful throughout the process because it really helped me to understand the what I was witnessing within my nuclear family, and to kind of like basically if like you're looking at a situation, you know, right in
Yeah.
front of you to kind of take that and
Ex-
just pull it back a little bit.
exactly.
Um, and that was like I think a lot of what she helped me with.
And giving yourself permission to take time to be sad, right? And not be a martyr, and not because like, yeah, obviously, and that was one of the things I was going to ask you, like right in the beginning, like obviously you've done well for yourself in business, and obviously you're, the type of person that's driven and you know l- like looks at fear, pauses for a little while, and then kind of goes and does it anyway. Like, I mean, you weren't sitting in Virginia going, "Oh, I don't know if I want really want to move." Like, "Oh, that seems a lot scary. I don't know anybody in New York." Or like, it seems to me from your, what you described, that you're someone that when your eyes on the ball, like, I mean, your focus is excellent, and your ability to do whatever it takes to move ahead. You have that. But w- when this other more humanistic side of you, needed to step in, um, like what has all that taught you, and what kind of characteristic traits do you feel really benefited you, and which characteristic traits did you kind of have to go, I need to like maybe um pay more attention to that, or tame that down, or you know
Yeah, I mean, so I think the answer to your question is like both what got me through it and also probably what I needed to look a little bit more closely at. So I think what
hmm
got me through it was actually being hyper vigilant and being the manager, and honestly to living in like a basic state of like constant fight or flight,
hmm
always trying to manage, always trying to like think two steps ahead and like plan everything because like you're obviously doing the work in your school, so you have to be very organized for that, but then also at home anticipating needs of others,
hmm
um, and yeah, just
hmm
making sure that there's peace in the household also, um, and yeah, and I mean, to do that, yeah, you sort of have to step into this like very much a kind of controlling masculine energy.
yeah.
Um, and so I think what I learned and what I try to tell people who friends or family that I know that either have somebody that they're like a loved one that's either, you know, going through a hard time or sick, or they just have a cancer diagnosis or something, is the people that I know that are going to be taking care of them, like if it's their husband or their partner or their sister or whatever, to take care of yourself, because you cannot take care of that other person if you don't take care of yourself. And that is like everything, like mentally and physically. And I think
Yeah.
the physical piece too for myself is another thing that like really got me through, was just actually exercising like almost every day.
Yeah.
Kept me like mentally sharp and physically sharp.
Yeah.
And I would wake up like really early to do that. I'd wake up at like, I don't know, 5 a.m., I guess,
Yeah.
and like go to a cycling class. And I would
Yeah.
do it like every day before school because, and it wasn't, it was like as much for my mental as it was for my
Yeah.
physical. So I think
I,
that's really important.
I'm glad you brought that up because like 100%, like it might seem like, oh, I don't have the energy to do that, but it just like
Yeah.
it gives you energy, right?
It
So
does give you energy, and it's really weird because now that I am in more of like a healing phase of healing, dealing with this very intense time period of it was 3 years, so that's a quite a bit chunk of time where I was really just in my nervous system was in constant fight or flight, very heightened, very like yeah, just being always assessing for some threat that might
yeah,
come, right?
yeah,
And so now I'm trying to step and be a little bit of a softer, more feminine energy.
yeah.
And it's funny because when I was in this like very I guess heightened state that I felt like had the energy to do it all.
Oh yeah, no, it's
And
I
then
think yeah.
now it's like I guess when you let yourself relax a little bit and soften, it's like, if I miss a workout in the morning,
Yeah.
it's like not the
It's not
like
the end
end
of the
all.
world. And then all of a sudden you slept 10 hours and you didn't even
Yeah.
know, and it's just,
Yeah.
no, I know it's a really hard thing, I think, to, cultivate. And I like what you said, like when I asked, what characteristic traits were, the most, um, necessary to get you like through it all, like even like grow in the corporate world, plus get through all the family trauma that you've been through. You said it's the same characteristic traits, and I think it's two sides of the same coin. It's like the shadow side of all these other traits that people seem to admire and
Yeah.
strive to have, right? But there's a shadow side to that as well, and there always is. um so
Yeah.
no,
And
and I'm
it definitely takes its toll. That's why
yeah,
when you asked like, what did you take away from it, or like what advice would you give, is like that's why I sort of tell people, yeah, like take care of yourself, because yeah, it will end up taking a toll. Like it sounds like from like maybe how I'm describing it, that I just like was resilient and just did what I had to do to get through it all. But I think at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, you look back at it and then you're like, oh, okay, I understand and I have compassion for myself that I did what I did in
yeah,
order to like survive the whole situation.
yeah.
But yeah, like at what cost? Like maybe it could have been handled a little bit differently. I think I learned those tools through my therapy, but I definitely did not have them in the beginning of the whole process. So
So you would definitely recommend people, I mean, not even like with family trauma, like, but that's the thing, like, I don't think there's any person in, in executive positions that like everybody goes through suffering, like, and
yeah.
everybody
Mhm.
has family challenges. And so, like, in other words, everybody's going to need it at some point in their life. And I think it's really important to get comfortable speaking out loud about it and getting comfortable with the idea of seeking help, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we all need to help. We all need help at certain times in our lives, sometimes more, at certain times than others. And I mean, I always like to think, if you had a daughter, and you saw her doing, everything that you did, it would probably be extremely painful for you to watch your daughter, and you'd probably, advise her to do it somewhat maybe differently. Um, and the other thing too, I want to ask you, like, looking back, did any of that really, would you, and I think I know your answer, but I want to ask, like, would any of that, like, being kinder to yourself, seeking therapy, going more into your feminine, energy and being able to receive love, care, compassion from people, would you say that hindered your career at all?
Um, Maybe a little bit. I mean, because it can feel like you are going through something alone,
Mm-hmm.
mm, or just something that, yeah, I had this sense that when I was interviewing for positions after or like during and after my MBA, that somehow the interviewers could sense that there was something wrong. I don't know if
Yeah,
that was like in my head or not, but
that's
I
a
think that there was like I wasn't fully present
yeah.
because I had this like major distraction going on.
Yeah.
And like in a way I was kind of, I wanted these very like, high responsibility positions, but in another way, I actually wanted to be able to just actually support my family more
Yeah.
because, yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Well,
I,
well,
yeah,
see, like I wouldn't even call that hindered though. Like because I think it was meant to be like that. Like, your body still was recovering. And if you would have stepped into these, high responsibility, high, like fast moving positions where there was a lot expected of you, and what if you would have, somewhat failed in that, and then you would have been feeling even worse, So I think
yeah.
it's sort of like things happen for a reason. And once you started to recover, slowly, and then, you're ready to look more confident and
Yeah. Well, I sort of knew, I think I mentioned before, like I sort of knew when I was like wrapping up my MBA, like the last like, 6 months, like, that's when people start interviewing and, usually will land a job before they graduate. I didn't, I sort of intentionally didn't do that. I mean, I still was obviously like networking and making connections and stuff, but once we got her diagnosis that she still had cancer and was going to have to undergo this like really intense treatment, that I just ended up taking fellowship because it was only required like 10 to 20 hours a week. And so if I needed to be there for my family and do that, then I could.
mm,
And yeah, I did that all the way through the rest of 2022. And then I ended up taking another fellowship in 2023.
hmm
So I felt like I was in school actually for a pretty long time, longer than the 2-year program.
mm,
Um, and yeah, I mean, I definitely learned a lot through that, through those experiences. And then, yeah, this year I ended up just launching my own business, and that's been also a learning
yeah.
experience.
Well, congratulations. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, I know it's just like it's a lot. So I mean, I mean, and we'll wrap up here, but I just, this is why I love interviewing, especially women, and because women in business, because they're I don't know. I mean, we do, we have more estrogen, and we do tend to feel more. But my point is, you can be all of that and still, like, launch your own business and be someone that's nurturing and taking care of yourself and all that. Like, I think it's all possible. You don't have to close the door on one thing in order to open the door on the other thing, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
you're in a relationship as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a relationship.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And
So,
we did almost 3 years long distance, which is like also, I don't
see,
advise, but yeah, it's hard, but I mean, it's good now because we're together, but,
you might have people looking you up and asking about, so how'd you do it? Like, yeah, no, not anything to do with business, but just even that is extremely challenging. So,
yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it's
I also think too, like I was thinking about this conversation before we started, and
mhm,
I was thinking about, what I feel like I went through was like a multi-year long marathon or something like that,
yeah,
right? Where it's like it's physically and emotionally draining. And I can't say that I'm a cancer survivor, right? I didn't have cancer myself, but in some ways I feel like a cancer survivor because I survived, supporting someone who I love
100%.
going
Well,
through that. And I think about sometimes the networks that, either if you're a member of the military or if you're a professional athlete or something like that, the doors that opens for you as a professional,
Yes.
after you've done your service or you've wrapped up your athletic career. And then, that is a very desirable trait to business professionals because it shows that you have resiliency. It shows that you have discipline. It shows that
Exactly.
you're able to work as a team. And perhaps if you had like a leadership position, it shows that you have leadership skills. And people put that on their resume, right?
Yeah.
Because it's tangible. It's easy, I think, to those who have been in service or those that have been athletes to relate to. Even if
Yeah.
you're not an athlete, if you're just a fan of a certain sport, right? It's easy
Yeah.
to have conversation around that. And you don't really put on your resume something like this because
No.
people just don't do that.
No.
But I mean, I do feel like it was somewhat of a battle that my family and I endured and went through, and it does make you more resilient. And I even remember, like on a lot of some applications, there was like one job that I really wanted, and it asked me to like describe a time when you showed resiliency. And it's like, well, do you put something down like this that's so personal and it's so like, I mean, people talk about cancer, but it's sort of one of those things that like people don't like to talk about
Right.
dying,
Right.
disease, because it's just like not this, it's not like sports, it's
No.
like where you can talk about it like the weather.
Right.
But yeah, it was I just looked at that question and I was like, if I could have a dime or a quarter for every time someone told me that I was resilient,
Yeah. Yeah.
I could like have proof to show you in this question, but I don't know.
Exactly. And you're right. No, I'm really glad you brought that up because it is something that you should be able to like put down as a status, because also you cannot help but to become more empathetic. When you
Mm,
go through something like this, I mean, it forces you to feel for others. And I think it makes a person much more emotionally intelligent by going through something that you did, right? Like you didn't ask for it, but it certainly made you be like that. And, there's three types of traumas. There's acute trauma, like that, car accident, war, death. There is chronic trauma, which is like, yeah, I mean, it could be being in a toxic relationship for years and years and years, something like that. And then there's something which I think you experienced, it's called vicarious trauma, which is feeling, the trauma of another. It's
mm,
having the empathy, like of another for and
yeah,
like it's like caregivers, and so.
yeah,
So yeah, you definitely experienced trauma, that's for sure. So and yeah, I think you're right. It is absolutely a sign of your resilience. So
yeah,
we would never ask for
yeah.
it.
Not when you
No.
ask for, definitely not
No.
when you ask for. But
No.
yeah, I mean, my sister is a fighter and she's very strong and she was very determined to beat this. And luckily, she had the support and the financial means to be able
Hmm.
to do that in the most comfortable way that she can, although the
Yeah.
whole process was very uncomfortable for her. Um, but yeah, and now she's healthy and obviously also the cancer that she had, it's one that we have, the medical tools to heal,
Hmm.
and that's not always the case,
Hmm.
um, for
Hmm.
some types of cancer. So I hope that, I work, like I said at the beginning, in like early stage
Hmm.
in climate sustainability. And the reasons for that, is to help propel innovations to market to try and heal some of the problems that we have, like in human and planetary health. And I think in people that are in sort of the biotech world that are working in cancer research and cancer cures, that yeah, it's really important to continue to fund these technologies and to make them more mainstream and available and accessible to people, because I mean cancer is just becoming more, I think, more and more prevalent.
Yeah.
And I think that though I actually believe, and I, I think a lot of people, there's a lot of data around this too, that the two issues with climate and the way we treat our planet is related to, human being exposed to toxins and getting, and like,
Yeah.
as a symptom of that, getting cancer. So
Yeah. 100%. I agree. 100%. Yeah, toxins in our environment is a
yeah,
huge
yeah,
contributor in
yeah,
the food
yeah,
quality,
what we
everything.
eat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, well, thanks so much, Madeline.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll link up, your how people can get a hold of you if they want to find out more about you and what you do and maybe how you manage, if they're facing some of these same things. So,
Yeah, definitely would be happy to talk to people and yeah, hopefully help if I can. And
okay.
thank you so much for the space to be able to have these conversations. I think it's really cool what you're doing, and I'm glad you're so passionate about talking to women in business. It's really important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for allowing this to happen. Okay, everyone else, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Sorry for the interruption, but I have an important message. If you're finding it tough to stay focused and execute on your goals, despite knowing you've got what it takes, I get it. The pressure to perform in executive roles can be intense, and sometimes the real challenge isn't just the work, it's what's going on internally. That's why I created the Execute program. It's not just about incorporating long-term behavior change. It's about addressing the psychological barriers that might be holding you back. As a psychotherapist, I bring a unique perspective that goes beyond traditional coaching. We dive deep to ensure that any underlying issues, such as anxiety or depression, are recognized and managed. This way, you're not just making progress, you're making transformative change. You can find all the details about Execute in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember that you can watch the full episode on YouTube, where I plan to hang out the most. Your feedback and suggestions for future guests are incredibly valuable to me, so please don't hesitate to post a comment. You are an integral part of this journey.